Welcome into Kitchen Talk Pickleball Edition. I'm your host, Caitlin Miller, and this week joining us is Dr. Erik Korem. Now, Dr. Korem has a lot of experience with NFL athletes, Olympians, NCAA players in health and human performance. So, Erik, thank you so much for coming on.
Caitlin, thank you so much for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Erik, tell me a little bit about your background and then kind of when you started getting involved in the pickleball space.
Yes, I spent about 16 years in the NFL and college football working as a sports scientist and performance coach. And my career really kind of had an inflection point about 13 years ago when I brought athlete tracking technology to the United States. So when I was at Florida State University, we were the first people to ever track football players, putting devices on their pads in practice or games. And we collected all sorts of data, like thousands of data points from GPS satellites and accelerometers and just crazy stuff. And we were able to help our players reduce injury and improve performance. And we had like an 88% reduction in injury in one season. Wow. And our team went on to win a championship. Yeah, it was pretty wild. And it led to this mass proliferation of this technology. So every NFL game that you see now is tracked using this technology. So if you see a player running down the field and it's like they're running 21 miles an hour, it says like AWS Next Gen Stats. That's the technology that we brought to the States. And so my whole career was really centered around, I'd say the latter half of it was like, how do we turn data into human performance solutions? And so I ended up starting sports science for the Houston Texans, and then I assumed a role of what's called a high performance director, where I oversaw like the physical training, the psychological training, nutrition, all the components of developing an athlete. And I wanted to bring that type of concierge, individualized service to anybody in the world with a wearable and not make it prohibitively expensive. So I built a company called AIM7, and we kind of soft launched the product in last September, and then I got into the world of pickleball. And a friend of mine called me, and he helped Steve Kuhn build Major League Pickleball in Duper. His name is Seth Jordan. He was the chief of staff there, and he's like, Erik, pickleball players are getting hurt. He's like, there's tons of injuries, and he's like, there's not one single health and fitness tech product in the market. And so I looked on the App Store. I was like, you're right. And then he introduced me to Tito, the CEO of Duper, and he looked at what we were doing. He's like, Erik, work with us. Help pickleball players. So we spent about 4 months just going all in on it. And I started going to tournaments. I started playing. And then I just fell in love with the sport and the people. And so, yeah, now I built a tech product for pickleball. So kind of crazy.
Wow, that is crazy. And obviously you've worked with all different types of athletes. Working and just traveling to tournaments, starting yourself playing pickleball, what are some of the issues that you're seeing in terms of injury prevention with pickleball players?
Yeah, so in my career, I worked with about 26 different types of sports, including tennis at the SEC level, swimmers, all sorts. So you really kind of get good at problem solving with sports. And I would say the number one thing that I'm seeing in pickleball in general is we would all agree that pickleball is a sport.
Yes.
But most people don't treat it like a sport, meaning they're not doing the things off the court or before they go on the court like you would do for any other sport. Like if you're going to go running, you're going to warm up, right? You're going to be doing some stuff to take care of your knees and your ankles. People do recovery things. I just see people step right onto the court and then they wonder why they're in pain and they're getting hurt. And so there's three basic things that everybody needs to be doing that's the scientific literature demonstrates will help prevent injuries. And the first is, and I kind of bucket these two things together, is you need to have some type of exercise training plan, which includes a dynamic warm-up before you step on the court. If people would just spend 5 to 10 minutes warming up, doing a just simple 4-step warm-up before they go on the court, they would mitigate against injury. They would play and feel better out the gate. And it's like a little dose of medicine over time. Their movement capabilities would improve. Another problem that I see is not enough people are doing resistance training, weightlifting off the court. And resistance training has been demonstrated to improve balance, to improve bone mineral density, to improve the strength of our tendons and ligaments. And you see all these people like blowing up Achilles, falling and fracturing things. So resistance training, just a simple training program a couple times a week would be phenomenal. And then the second big bucket item is people fall in love with the sport like really fast. Like Caitlin, like when you got introduced, like did you go from like not playing to how many times were you playing per week?
I know, literally from like not playing to like 5 times a week. I got addicted. It was supposed to be a hobby and now I'm competing.
Right, there you go. Well, unless you've been highly physically active, and also the stress of pickleball is specific to being on a court, sharp accelerations and decelerations in a small area. And so what happens is if you go from 0 to 100, your risk of injury goes through the roof. Yep. And so if you microwave the process, you should expect a microwave product. And so the kind of rule of thumb that everybody should follow is, let's say you get introduced to the sport and you're like, okay, I'm just going to start playing twice a week for an hour. Okay, that's a reasonable, with a day or two in between. After that, you shouldn't increase your time on court by more than 10 to 15% per week. So for instance, if you're playing, 100 minutes a week, add an extra 15 minutes the next week. And maybe 15 minutes the week after that. And slowly over time, you're giving your body the ability to accumulate stress and adapt to that stress. Otherwise, your tendons and ligaments and tissues aren't going to be ready for it, and they're going to break. It's just the way it is. Coming up here, we're about to start NFL training camp. And you can see this in every training camp situation around the world. Players go from an off season. In NFL, they're by themselves right now. Then they go into training camp, and almost all of the injuries occur in the first 10 days. Why? Because you can't acclimatize fast enough to what's happening on the field. So the same principle would apply for pickleball. And then the last thing I would say is poor technique. And you need to get some technical coaching. When I first started playing pickleball, my bicep tendon started hurting me. That's like right up on my shoulder. And I realized that I wasn't rotating my hips enough. And I was doing everything with my arm and shoulder. And I got a coach and she's like, whoa. Let's fix that. As soon as I fixed my technique, guess what? Problems started going away. So to recap, it would be, warming up in resistance training, slowly increasing your time on the court, and then you need to get technically proficient.
Well, it's interesting you say that because it's such a hard surface. I grew up as a tennis player, and I feel like that's why so many tennis players have injuries, because you're not on turf or you're not on the grass. So it's like, these quick movements with pickleball, and people don't realize, like, especially those that haven't played or just started playing, like how hard that is on your body. So like you're saying, like not going from 0 to 100 like many of us have, and also doing the dynamic workout too. It's funny you say that, because like I've actually had 2 back surgeries from rowing crew. And then I actually got a knee injury at the US Open from pickleball. And so I'm like, now I definitely do my dynamic stretching. But prior to those injuries, I was very lackadaisical about that and wanted to just like hop right on the court. So I think that's a very important message for people to learn, especially so you can play the sport the rest of your life.
Yeah. And, there was a gentleman who's a 5-0 player in Michigan. And he was playing highly competitive pickleball, and he started using our app and started doing the warm-ups. And I got this like random DM, and he's like, hey, I just want to let you know that I started coming out the gate faster in my tournaments. And I'm like, cool. And I'm like, what would you attribute that to? He goes, I actually warmed up. There's like multiple things that are happening when you warm up. It's not just like preventing injury. You're also increasing, so your nervous system is what really is like the master organ, right? Like people have heard it's like muscle memory. Your muscles don't have memory. The nervous system actually kind of what's called innervates your muscles, and it tells it how to fire and contract. And that all comes from your brain down your spinal cord. When you warm up, you start ramping up all these systems. And then what happens is you can produce more power, more speed, and you have greater range of motion. So instead of having to take 10 or 15 minutes to get into the game, you're onto the court and you're already ready to roll. I would say one more little thing that might help people. You should always go from general to specific. So a 10-minute general warm-up, and then when you step on the court, most people are good at this. They dink, right? And then they move farther and farther away from the net. You should slowly escalate the intensity of what you're doing. So start dinking, move back, maybe start some easy drives, maybe some drop shots, then some drives, then some serves, and then get going.
Okay, no, I was going to ask how long is a good dynamic warm up? So you think about 10 minutes?
Yeah, and you don't need, like, I understand, like, if you rent a court or if you have a time, it's like, I'm stepping on the court and I'm playing. Do the warm up off the court.
I was going to say, get there early.
Get there early. I was at the U.S. Open when you were there. I was there with Megan and Ryler.
Okay.
And I started, you're going to love this. I have a quick story for you. So I'm out playing, at a facility in Katy, Texas, and I'm sharing Aim 7 with people and showing them our app. And I meet this guy named Julio. And everybody's like, you got to meet Julio. He's like the guy. Everybody knows Julio. And he's drinking a beer. He's very skilled. And I'm like, hey, Julio, why don't you warm up? And he kind of points around. He goes, do you see anybody else warming up? I'm like, oh, so you're embarrassed. I was like, just be weird. Warm up, man. And so it just kind of hit me. I was like, oh gosh. So I started wearing these t-shirts that say be weird and warm up. If I had 500 of those at the US Open, I would have sold every single one of them because people were stopping me. They're like, yeah, I totally get that. Long story short, Julio, he said he downloaded the app, hadn't heard from him. About 4 weeks later, he sends me a video of him warming up at the US Open and then winning a medal. And then the next thing I know, he's posting it all over social media. So he went from like, I'm embarrassed to do this to I feel so much better. And so now people are wearing these Be Weird warm-up shirts all over the place. And it's kind of like our little movement, like it's going to be weird for a while and then it's going to become normal for everybody.
Right. No, I love that. I want one of those shirts.
Well, I'll get you one. We're making a new run of them right now.
Well, what's so funny at the U.S. Open, so you know how I told you I hurt my knee? I ran to the med tent because we were still in the running, and I actually ran into Ryler, and he was the one that gave me his knee sleeve to finish out my matches for the day. So that's so funny. What a small world. So we probably actually crossed paths at the U.S. Open.
No doubt. I was with them. I literally lived with them for the entire week. I didn't live in the RV, but I was staying. They found a host family where they had parked the RV in the backyard, and I stayed with that family. And then every morning I would get up at 6, drive Ryler to the facility, come back, get the kids, help warm them up, do recovery with them. Like that was kind of like the beginning of my long-term pickleball journey.
Wow, that's so funny. What a small world. That's what I love about pickleball. And obviously the mental part of the game. This has always been my favorite as an athlete. I think people don't realize how much mental strength you need, especially at the higher level in pickleball. One of the things I notice compared to other sports I play is you can go from 0-0 to losing 0-5 in a matter of minutes. And it's what is it going to take for me to get that score out of my head and to push through and to take 1 point at a time? And it's just crazy how fast you can gain momentum or lose momentum. So in your eyes, how important is mental fitness and how can people kind of exercise that with pickleball?
Yeah, this is a great question. First of all, let me give you a definition that I use for mental fitness, and I'll kind of break it down. But mental fitness is the ability to be consciously present and to process information without bias. And this empowers you to respond quickly and rationally, that's the key word, to changing circumstances through committed actions anchored in your training. What does that mean? Essentially, when you get in a game and all things are flying at you, like the number one thing that every single athlete wants is control of their attention. My good friend, Dr. Peter Haberl, he's the senior psychologist for the U.S. Olympics. He's on our team at AIM-7. He always says that attention is the currency of performance. And every athlete wants control of attention. So I call it the 1-point mentality. Actually, Roger Federer recently, we put a post up on this on our Instagram and it went crazy. Have Zane talking about this. And essentially what it is, like in football, one of the great coaches I worked for said that every play has a lifespan of its own. There's 150 plays in a game. In that one play, you execute the play, and then when it's over with, you process what happened and you move forward. In pickleball, it's the same way. There's a point, you can process it, and then you need to move forward. And then you need to have a process for resetting between plays, or resetting between points. And the most important, like the foundation of that is, do I have control of my attention? Because your attention can wander. It can start going off to, man, I suck, or how did this happen, or whatever. Instead of like, okay, I made this mistake, or I did this well, next. And one of the best ways that you can train your attention is through mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is not some woohoo practice. You know, when I first started using it with athletes in 2012, people were like, what is this? You know, and we actually did, I was at the University of Kentucky. We did one of the first studies with Headspace on the impact of mindfulness and cortisol levels in football players. Cortisol is a stress hormone. We found that players that consistently engaged in mindfulness had lower stress cortisol levels. So what does it do? It just helps you focus your attention. Have you ever done mindfulness, Caitlin?
No, I haven't, and I'd love to do that.
It's really simple. It's not complex. You don't really even need like one of these apps, but they're helpful. But essentially what you do is you hone in on some type of physical sensation. So most people, it's their breath. So they would literally just close their eyes and you would sit there and you would just focus on your breath from the inhalation till it stops to the exhalation. You will find that very quickly your mind will begin to wander off. And that's totally normal. The key is not coming down on yourself when your mind wanders off. The key is then to be able to gently pull your attention back to your breath and then come back to that physical sensation. When you practice this over time, Dr. Misha Jha, her lab at the University of Miami, has found that just 12 weeks of mindfulness training, 1 hour a week, literally rewires certain parts of your brain. And it helps with reducing anxiety, depression, even perception of pain. It reduces mind wandering and something called rumination, where like, you ever had like a bad thought and you just kind of keep thinking about it and think, I call it chasing rabbits.
Yeah.
And for athletes, it helps you with attentional control. And so it could be anything. You could take a mindful shower where literally like, instead of just getting in the shower and showering, like it's like, I feel the suds in my hair, like the water on my body, or eating, just literally eating and being mindful of chewing and the taste and the texture of the food. I highly recommend mindfulness as the absolute number one training methodology for improving mental fitness. I'll tell you one more thing. When I went and visited Peter at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado, I was like, Peter, I want to see where you train these world-class Olympians. For like, this is the best sports psychologist in the world.
Right.
He took me to an empty room. And on all there was a mirror on one side. And he's like, and this is it. It's basically like a mind gym. And mindfulness is so hard. Like at the beginning, it's hard and it's meant to be hard. But the ability to notice where your attention is and to bring it back, that's a superpower. And that will dramatically impact your pickleball game.
Wow. Okay. This is something I need to start doing, because I do have a tendency of like, I'm mentally tough in sports skate, you know, when I do well under pressure and stuff, but I do feel like I have a lot of stress. Like I just have so much going on. It's hard to, you know, take it all in and deal with it. And so for mindfulness, is there like a certain practice or app or place like people like myself can go to like start that process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to just promote what I'm doing, but we actually have an entire series in our app where Dr. Haberl introduces mindfulness, takes you through an entire video series to teach you, and then we have recorded mindfulness sessions and tools like countdown timers and all sorts of stuff that you can use inside our app. We tried to build a cohesive performance app for mind, body, and recovery, and pardon me. One of the things I noticed was there's not a lot of really good education on like how to do this in the most simplistic way, and it's not done in like 15-minute videos. So we kind of broke it down into 3 to 4 minute chunks. But Dr. Haberl's series is absolutely magnificent. So that I would recommend the AIM-7 app for that.
So, okay, so the AIM-7 app, so that basically, obviously, pickleball is a part of it, but it can be used for all types of athletes, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are pickleball focused, but you can go in there and get personalized workout programs, mental training. There's also an entire section where you can go in and be like, okay, I want to do a workout today. And then AIM-7 is like, we recommend an aerobic session. You click in and whatever you track, it's like, oh, you like to do the elliptical? And it'll be like, go on the elliptical for 35 minutes at this heart rate zone. Like, it's ridiculous levels of personalization that's never been seen before in the market. But we've made it very, very simple and easy to digest. But to your point, there's the physical side, then there's the mental side. And then there's also recovery and sleep. And so we wanted to try to create a system that meets you where you are and kind of help bring you to where you want to be.
And that's one of the things we haven't talked about, right, is recovery. And that's, huge and so important for athletes. So what are like the important parts? I know obviously sleep, nutrition, stretching. I mean, what do you think pickleball players should focus on when it comes to recovery?
Yeah, I would say like a high level recovery comes down to your capacity. And so how much stress you can handle. So like, think about this. If like all the stress you could handle, I've got a little coffee mug. I don't know if this is going to be on video or not, but if all the stress you can handle is in this tiny little coffee mug, and the stress that you can handle is like, let's say it's coffee and it's filled up to the brim. And then I said, hey, Caitlin, I want you to grab this mug and I want you to run across the room. Coffee be all over the place, be a total mess. That's like what it's like to get burnt out, right? Life feels like it's chaotic. You've reached your capacity. Well, now imagine we help you build a bowl that's like you can barely put both of your arms around, and then I take that same level of coffee or stress and I pour it into that bowl. You could sprint up and down stairs and nothing's going to bother you, right?
Right.
The key is building more capacity for physical and mental stress. And there's like 5 key pillars to doing this. There's exercise, there's sleep, mental fitness, nutrition, and healthy relationships. I think we talked about exercise. Sleep is like one of the most important things that we can nail in the recovery and just having good mental health, because sleep is when the brain and the body recovers. There's Thomas Dekker, the British dramatist, said it's the golden chain that ties our health and human bodies together. And so if you want to talk about sleep, we can talk about that really quick and kind of like...
Yeah, I want to know, because there's so many different things that people say, like what is the healthy amount of sleep, right? I always feel like I'm hearing 8 hours, but yeah, I mean, and it might differ for people. I don't know how that works. So yes, let's talk about sleep. What is the healthy amount? Is there a healthy amount?
Yeah, so I can say this. My doctoral work was in sleep and stress resilience, so I'm not going to give you anything that's hocus pocus here. There's 3 things to consider. Number 1 is duration. So 7 to 9 hours is kind of the golden window that you need to be getting every night. And if you're that person that's sitting here listening going, you know what, I do really good on 4.5 or 5, I can almost guarantee you do not have that genetic polymorphism for that. That's like a half of a % of the population. Research demonstrates that people that sleep 7 to 9 hours a night have a lower risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and a decrease in overall all-cause mortality, meaning they just are less likely to die at a young age. As a matter of fact, there was a study that was done with twins. So if you want to know how behavior impacts somebody's health, you look at like identical twins. So they looked at 21,000 twin pairs over 20 years. Wow. And they found that the twin that slept less than 7 hours a night had a 24% increased risk of all-cause mortality. So most people overestimate their sleep by about a half an hour. So if you're like, okay, I need 7 hours, you really need to be in bed for about 7.5. If you think about the time it takes to actually fall asleep.
Right.
The next component, so there's duration and then there's onset. What time do you go to bed? There was a recent paper that was done by the Broad Institute at Harvard and MIT and the University of Colorado with over 800,000 people in the UK Biobank. And they used genetic data, sleep trackers, it's a crazy study. And they found that those people that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier by 1 hour. So let's say you go to bed at 1 and you decide, I'm going to start going to bed at 12. They had a reduction in major depression by 23%. And if they shifted it back another hour, there was almost a 40% reduction. Now, why is this? And without going into a whole bunch of crazy stuff, the earlier you go to bed and the earlier you wake up, the more exposure you have to natural light. Because your sleep cycle is basically manipulated by two things. One, this kind of like biological drive for sleep. And the other thing is this circadian system. And your circadian clock is anchored by sunlight. And so when you view sunlight in the morning, it kicks off a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that impact metabolism, that impact your mood, it can impact your risk of depression. And so how long you sleep, when you go to bed, so ideally you're in bed before midnight. And then the last thing is consistency. So have you ever heard of something called social jet lag?
No, I mean, I can guess what that is, but is it when you're basically on a schedule throughout the week and then you go on a different schedule on the weekend?
You got it. And so This is a major risk factor. So you basically feel jet lagged on Monday. That's why people are like, man, I feel terrible on Monday.
Yes.
The more inconsistency you have in your sleep schedule, the greater your risk for weight gain, fatigue, cardiometabolic disease, and depression. And so you should try to keep it within like a 1 hour window either way. So just 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Be asleep before midnight and just be consistent with it. If you did those three things, forget REM sleep and deep sleep on your wearables, all that stuff's inaccurate. If you just did those three things, you would see dramatic changes in your overall health and wellness.
That is so interesting you say that because I work the evening news, but I'm up early every day because I'm active and do a lot of stuff. But I literally, like our last show's at 10 p.m. I'm like in bed, passed out by like 11:30, and then I wake up at like 7:30, let's say. And then on Saturdays, I tend to do the same, but it's Sunday where I let myself sleep in. And then Monday morning, I swear every Monday, I feel horrible. Like I'm like trying to get out of bed by 9, just to like get my morning started before work. And I have to try to break. It's hard because you're so tired and you want to wait for that one day to sleep in a little more, but that all makes sense now.
Here's my recommendation. Keep the same sleep schedule and just take a 1 hour nap on Sunday.
Okay. Yeah. So napping, is that good, bad? How do you nap? You know, if someone has like a long day or like on a Sunday wants to have extra rest, is that the best way to go about doing it?
Yeah, I would say a short nap, definitely less than an hour and a half. I'd say keep it to 30 to 45 minutes. Research demonstrates it boosts your mood, boosts performance. It's an excellent way to recover a little bit of sleep. I like to take a nap on Saturday and Sunday. I try to get up roughly around the same time, 6:30 in the morning, and then I take a Saturday afternoon nap, and that just refuels my tank. Even a 15 to 20 minute nap, you don't even have to fall asleep. Just closing your eyes, completely relaxing, it's like a superpower. And I wish more people would, even at work, if you're just feeling really, really fatigued, just close your eyes for 15 minutes. You'll wake up feeling a lot better.
Awesome. Erik, I could literally talk to you about this for hours. I love it. It's so interesting. Everyone go check out his app, AIM7. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned to see who will join us in the kitchen next time.